Let's make the turn to our top story, which is Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial. It resumes later this morning after contentious moments involving a witness for the former president's defense team. Trump's lawyers called veteran New York attorney Robert Costello to the stand, looking to further the narrative that Michael Cohen is motivated by revenge. At one point, Cohen was considering hiring Costello at Rudy Giuliani's recommendation. Costello had promised to act as a back channel to former President Trump, but Cohen never retained him, and the two have feuded publicly ever since. Costello testified Cohen told him several times that he did not, quote, have anything on Donald Trump and that he paid Stormy Daniels hush money, quote, on his own. Costello soon became aggravated after several objections by prosecutors began making comments under his breath. This is a witness, and rolling his eyes. This prompted presiding Judge Merchan to ask the jury to leave before addressing the situation. Quote, I want to discuss proper decorum in my courtroom, he said. So when there is a witness on the stand, if you don't like my ruling, you don't say, geez, okay? And then you don't say, strike it, because I'm the only one that can strike testimony in the courtroom. Do you understand that? Costello responded with, I understand. But the exchange only grew more tense, Judge Merchan saying, okay, and then if you don't like my ruling, you don't give me side eye. You don't roll your eyes. Do you understand that? Do you understand that? Costello answered, I understand that. I understand what you are saying. But Judge Merchan did not like the look Costello was giving him and said, quote, are you staring me down right now? The judge then completely cleared the courtroom of press and spectators to speak one-on-one with the witness. Judge Merchan purposely allowed his conversation to continue. On record, adding to court transcripts, he told Costello, quote, I'm putting you on notice that your conduct is contemptuous. If you try to stare me down one more time, I will remove you from the stand. I will strike his entire testimony. Do you understand me? End quote. Shortly after that exchange, the prosecution began its cross-examination of Costello, which will continue this morning, Joe. So an extraordinary moment in Judge Merchan making it clear that whatever you are doing to perform for President Trump right now, whatever you're trying to do to signal that you are continue to be sort of a tough guy, a thug on behalf and in defense of President Trump, it's not going to work in this courtroom.
Well, exactly. And he's playing like the clowns behind him that all come in with their cyborg red ties to an audience of one. Yep. And that makes his disrespectfulness toward the judge, but far more importantly, toward the court system itself, all the more maddening. And why, if he were to do it again, he needs to be sent to jail. He needs to be sent to jail immediately. Just let's take a step back. And Judge Merchan has had to show restraint. Well, every day, you have the defendant going out and attacking him personally, suggesting that he's corrupt, suggesting that the court system is rigged, making it extraordinarily personal toward him and members of his family. And I suppose I wouldn't do it. I don't care who the defendant were. If I'm the judge, they're going to jail. And I would bring them in shackles day in and day out. I don't care if we're a Democrat or Republican, whether it was a steel worker, a teacher, or the President of the United States. You have to respect the judge because the judge represents the judicial system. And I understand the balancing act that this judge is in the middle of, Willie, but you take everything in its totality. Maybe it's harder to send a former president to jail for contempt when any other American would be sent to jail.
That is correct.
This double standard stuff that somehow Donald Trump's on the wrong end of the double standard, that's just, as Aristotle used to say when he was debating Socrates, that's just bullshit, rank bullshit. The fact is, there are two standards here, Willie. And Donald Trump benefits from those double standards every single time. And now the defendant's witnesses are doing the same. Again, I've never seen this. I've never seen this before in a court because if I did, well, you'd see the back of them going to jail, and the next morning they would be wearing orange.
And you're right. Judge Merchan has been walking this line for months now, frankly, and every ruling he makes, every decision he makes with consideration of the circumstances around this case, that you have a former president who perhaps wants you to put his witness in jail, or maybe even wants you to put him in jail. Let's bring into the conversation former U.S. attorney and MSNBC contributor Chuck Rosenberg, former litigator and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, the host of Way Too Early, White House bureau chief at Politico, Jonathan Lemire, with us as always as well. Good morning to you all. Chuck, let me start with you. How extraordinary is what we saw yesterday? Are you surprised that Judge Merchan did not, in fact, hold this witness in contempt? Or do the circumstances prevent him from actually taking that step?
A little bit of both, Willie. I think Judge Merchan, over the course of this trial, has demonstrated great equanimity, right? Patience, thoughtfulness. Frankly, that's what you want in a judge. Always, all the time, even under these circumstances. And so I don't fault Judge Merchan for not holding Mr. Costello in contempt or ordering him to lock up for a night. I think he handled it exactly the right way. You stop the proceedings. Importantly, you send the jury out because they don't need to hear any of this. This should not factor into their determination at all. And you read the guy the riot act. And then, if he does it again, if he doesn't get it, if he didn't hear the message loud and clear, there are other remedies. But as a first step, I think he handled it exactly right.
Lisa, it's almost like the gag order with President Trump. I'm going to give you warning. I'll give you another warning. I'm going to charge you $1,000 every time. Do you see where this is going? To Donald Trump, and in this case, to the witness. Knock it off. I don't want to have to do the thing that I could do.
Yeah, and yesterday, to your point, Willie, sort of went in stages, right? Because the first thing he did was to ask the jury to leave. And that's when he gave the recitation about, I hear your G's, I see your side eye, it's time to knock it off. And at one point in that recitation, when Merchan thinks that Costello is staring him down, he says, "Are you staring me down?" And that's when he cleared the courtroom of all the press. And you can see in the transcript, the press is absolutely furious at having been told to leave the room. But what Merchan is trying to do in that moment is deprive Costello of the very audience that he wants. It's less about the press and depriving us of our First Amendment rights and more about ensuring that Costello doesn't get to continue to be performative in that moment, and that he gets the opportunity to say to him without anybody else there, stop being contemptuous. That has a meaning. Knock it off. And when the cameras went back on in the overflow room, people started laughing because the face that Bob Costello was giving was a markedly different one. It was like a combination of embarrassed and angry. And then Merchan, by contrast, leaning back in his seat, looking at Costello like this, knowing I have regained control over my courtroom. It was really something to behold.
So, Chuck, I'm wondering, just big picture, how much headway had the defense made up until this moment, and how much did this interaction, which I guess was kept on the record for quite some time, even after the jury left, how much did the incident undermine that headway, if any?
Well, they did make some headway. I mean, you would expect the defense to make some headway on cross. With Mr. Cohen, for instance, they elicited the fact that he's a liar and a thief. And with Mr. Costello, who the defense had called as their own witness, they were making the point that Michael Cohen had made inconsistent statements. So, is that helpful to the defense? It is. Was this blow-up helpful to the defense? It was not. However, the lecture by Judge Merchan, I think completely earned by Mr. Costello, was out of the earshot of the jury. Again, completely appropriate. Did the jury see, Mika, what led up to it? Of course they did. They understood what was happening. They may not have known what happened when they were gone, but they certainly knew why they were gone. And none of that's helpful. So, I think Lisa's right. Some of this is performative. It's certainly for Mr. Trump. I don't know how that it helps his case, and I know that the jury knows everything. They always do.
So to Chuck's point, John, we just saw a transcript of some of the testimony up on the screen that the defense did get Michael Cohen to admit, yes, I stole from the Trump Organization about $30,000 of money that was supposed to go somewhere else, trying to make the case that he himself is a con artist, that he himself is a liar, and in this case, a thief, and suggesting that the prosecution is sort of hanging its hat on this witness who you should not believe. That's the argument from the defense anyway.
Yeah, and it's right here on the New York Post. Liar, con artist, thief. That's how they're deeming Michael Cohen and with their editorial slant. Yeah, I mean, look, Cohen has admitted to most of this, including the theft. He said that previously. He overbilled a company that he was supposed to reimburse. He took some off the top there. And we know who he is, and we've known for a long time who Michael Cohen is. Lisa, he's someone who spent time in prison because he lied under oath. So let's talk beyond the PR stunt here, beyond the front page of the tabloids. Do we think the defense undermined Cohen's credibility enough where it will hurt the case, or had the prosecution done enough to buttress it?
I actually think that the prosecution did a really good job of drawing the sting and bringing out some of those facts well in advance of any cross-examination. You noted the $30,000 that Michael Cohen took. While yesterday was the first time he said in such stark terms, I stole it, it was the prosecution that first raised the issue. You kept that additional $30,000. And then when Todd Blanche said all the things that he said yesterday about stealing it, he opened the door wide open to an explanation of what was that $50,000 reimbursement for again? That gave Michael Cohen an opportunity to say, oh, I'm glad you asked. You know what it was? I paid a tech company to rig a poll about the most popular businessmen of the last century. And what they did was basically rig the algorithm so that Donald Trump's ego would be satiated. He directed me to do this. I did it for his benefit. And basically giving the jury yet another example of here's Michael Cohen committing another crime or another misdeed for the benefit of, at the direction of, in coordination with Donald Trump. So I think it was a mixed bag for the defense yesterday.
All right, let's hear some of this. Get your take on the news here. Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial resumes this morning after some contentious moments involving a witness for the former president's defense team. NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett has more on yesterday's proceedings.
Former President Trump's defense team launching a fiery start to its case, taking direct aim at the credibility of star prosecution witness Michael Cohen, calling Robert Costello, a former federal prosecutor and attorney for Rudy Giuliani, who advised Cohen before a falling out. Costello describing Cohen as, quote, manic at a 2018 meeting after Cohen's home and office were raided by the FBI. While Cohen is now implicating Mr. Trump in an alleged crime, Costello testifying Cohen told him back then, I swear to God, Bob, I don't have anything on Donald Trump, directly refuting Cohen's testimony that Mr. Trump directed him to pay off Stormy Daniels before the 2016 election. Quote, Michael Cohen said numerous times that President Trump knew nothing about those payments and that he did this on his own, Costello testifying. The judge repeatedly sustaining prosecution objections, leading to a heated scolding of Costello after he audibly muttered, quote, ridiculous and geez. The judge at one point saying, are you staring me down, and clearing the courtroom. All of it after Cohen earlier revealed he stole tens of thousands of dollars from his former client. Cohen, who once said he would take a bullet for Mr. Trump, admitting he duped his old boss into reimbursing him more money than he was owed. Cohen saying that he gave a tech company $20,000 in a brown paper bag and pocketed the rest, tens of thousands of dollars more, for himself. Trump attorney Todd Blanche saying, you stole from the Trump Organization, right? Cohen answering, yes, sir. Later, when questioned by the prosecutor, Cohen saying he stole the money because he had not received a large enough bonus. Quote, I just felt it was almost like self-help, Cohen said. The defense also suggesting Cohen has profited in other ways off his association with the former president, pointing to the fact that he raked in over $4 million in consulting agreements while also serving as Mr. Trump's personal attorney. And the defense says Cohen is now cashing in as a top Trump critic, too, making over $3 million on 2 books, while Cohen testified he's considering a potential TV show and a 3rd book. The defense calling it a motivation to lie. Blanche asking, do you have a financial interest in the outcome of this case? Cohen saying, yes, sir. Though Cohen insisted he'd make more money if Mr. Trump were acquitted, because Cohen says it gives me more to talk about in the future. Cohen's credibility critical to the DA's case, as he's the only witness who has testified the former president had advanced knowledge of the plan to pay Stormy Daniels and then approved a scheme to disguise how he paid Cohen back, which Mr. Trump denies.
There were no crimes. We did nothing wrong. And I want to get back to campaigning. I'm representing millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people.
Cohen in exchange with prosecutors, quote, do you have any doubt Mr. Trump gave you the final sign-off for the payment before you went to the bank? Cohen replying, no doubt.
NBC's Laura Jarrett reporting for us there. So, Anthony, you know a lot of the players involved here. You've been following this really closely. The prosecution rested yesterday. Lisa Rubin told us in our last hour, reading the tea leaves and the transcript, actually, she believes the defense is going to be finished today as well. Closing arguments next week, according to the judge. Has the prosecution made a convincing case? You never know what the jury is thinking, but do you believe the prosecution has made the case?
So I think the prosecution has made the case, but everything about our lives is facts and then optics and feel. And so, you know, his testimony probably doesn't feel right to many people. So the question is, the judge is going to turn to the jury. Criminal procedure in our country is, here are the facts of the case. Do you believe the facts of the case? And does that tip over into beyond a reasonable doubt? If you read the transcript, Michael Cohen has done that. Moreover, Michael Cohen, it reflected badly on him that he's a liar and a thief, all the things they put in the New York Post, but he told the truth on that stand. And I think there's evidence of that just by the fact of the way he told the truth about himself doing very dishonest things. And so optics and feel, are there 12 people that are going to take the criminal procedure of the United States seriously and cross over to beyond a reasonable doubt? That's the issue.
Anthony, you were telling us on the podcast last week that you visited Michael Cohen when he was in prison. The defense has tried to make it very clear, listen, this guy was a liar all the time. He was a liar then and he's lying now.
Right.
From your relationship with Michael, what makes you so clear that even though he lied in the past, he's not lying when he's taking the stand now?
He's damning himself, Gaddy. Ultimately, when he's did you steal from Donald Trump? Yes. Did you put the money in a paper bag? Yes. And so, in other words, like, there's no room to escape. He's in the corner. He's under oath. He's already gone to jail for perjury. Is he going to re-perjure himself in arguably the most important things he's going to say in his life up until this point, which is in that case? And so for all those reasons, I believe him. Has he done bad things in the past? Yes. Has he lied in the past? Yes. But is he lying right now? And I think that's what the prosecutor has to get in front of the jury. But no, listen, I mean, but come on. Trump is a bad guy. And what ends up happening to people like Michael, and I said this, I think, the last time I was here, don't be anybody's groupie. Because once you're somebody's groupie, you start to mold yourself into what they want you to do. Michael did that. He has to reform for that, and he has to pay the price for it. And I think he is paying the price for it.
So, Anthony,
look at the cover of the New York Post. I think he's paying the price for it.
You get around, both upstairs and downstairs, many friends in different areas of life, different ways
in and out of the White House,
days of making a living,
quickly.
Ordinary people, important people. What's your sense of the impact that this trial is having on the general public? Not here, where we talk about it each and every day, but average people out there. Do they have any interest at all in this?
I think they have mild interest. I think there's a large group of independents that have, hey, is he a convicted felon or not? I think there's a binary thing that goes on in some people's minds related to that. I think don't underestimate the IVF abortion situation for the president, the former president, and the Republican Party. I think that the Democrats would be very wise to play that over and over again come November. And, you know, Trump knows this, you know, and he is trying to offer up a moderate position on abortion. And the thing I would say to the Biden camp, you guys got to wake up, you know, stop placating to the hard left and move into the center here, because this is where this is going to be won by those independents.
So on that issue, the Biden campaign committee has to wake up.
Yeah.
In 2020, in May of 2020, when Donald Trump was president, over 100,000 Americans had died of COVID. Why isn't the Biden campaign focusing on the first few months of 2020 and the numbers of people who died of COVID, when the then president of the United States was telling people, just go drink antifreeze, it'll go away. Summer's coming, it'll go away.
So, again, I can just give you my opinion on that because I'm not close to their campaign, but I think that's a tough thing to say, because a lot of that stuff was outside the president's control, and the president himself, meaning President Biden, knows some of that stuff is situational. We can personalize it onto President Trump, but I don't think they want to do that any more than they want to take personally the inflation. If Donald Trump was president of the United States today, this would be Trump's inflation. We have a tendency to personalize onto presidents what is in fact cyclically situational. And I don't think Mr. Trump, Mr. Biden, you pick the president, look, were things mishandled? Certainly. But that was a really tough period of time in the United States. I don't think we want to go there.
Anthony, I would say he did lie to the American people about the existence of COVID for quite some time. And if you listen to the tapes that Bob Woodward took,
that's different.
People died.
Talk about we'll talk about the lies. He's been in the courts, Mika. They say that he's a rapist. You have 12 people in a civil court, not a criminal court, that said that he is a rapist. I would be talking about things like that. The lying. He's been defined as a rapist by a civil jury. Those are the things I'd be bringing up over and over again. I think the deaths, are something that I think they're probably trying to be careful of. The lying, no question. The other facts about him, no question. Pound him every day on those facts.
Joining us now, former FBI Director James Comey. He's the author of the new book entitled Westport, a crime novel. And welcome back to the show. We'll get to your novel in just a moment. It's good to have you on. I'd love to ask you this question. Given everything this country has been through since the run-up to the 2016 election, which I know you've been asked repeatedly about your choices and actions before the 2016 election, and you have answered. You did what you thought you had to do. But given the magnitude of all the counts against Donald Trump, 87, plus the civil lawsuits and liabilities that have been put on him, do you think there are any areas where, if so, is the law falling short in the prosecution of Donald Trump?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you for having me on. I think the law could move more quickly, especially in the classified documents case in Florida. The case could move more quickly in the appeals process in the January 6th federal case. But I actually think overall the law has passed its stress test over the last 5 years. The Manhattan case is showing the American people this is how it works. This is what the rule of law looks like.
So let's get your evaluation of what you've heard of the trial so far. It's in its closing hours. The defense may end up resting today, and then next week we'll get closing arguments and then to the jury. So verdict could come week, 10 days time, hard to say. As you've been watching it, what's your assessment of how the prosecution is done?
Much better than I expected, just having read the indictment. And of course, I've tried a lot of cases, so it's dangerous to talk about them when you haven't been in the courtroom for every moment. But this seems to have gone in very well, built brick by brick in a way that's not cross-examinable, with documents and texts and the defendant's own voice. Much better than I expected. And so I've told my family, from the outside, I would think there's a very high likelihood of conviction, smaller likelihood of a hung jury, very little likelihood approaching zero of an acquittal.
Mr. Director, there's a strong possibility that Donald Trump may be reelected as president of the United States this fall. When you think about it, given your vast experience in the Justice Department and as head of the FBI, what are the principal points of danger within the Justice Department if there's another Trump presidency, given his nature, given what you know about him?
He is a threat to the rule of law in America. To me, that's what this election is about. Not about policy differences. It's about what kind of country are we going to be. If he has the ability, smarter than he was last time, to use the power of the Department of Justice and the FBI to target his enemies especially, the rule of law in America will change in a way we haven't seen in our lifetime.
When you say target his enemies, how would he do that?
Well, I think the first thing he would do is he would express it in his first term as a wish. I want people to go after so-and-so. I want people to go after Andrew McCabe, the former deputy director of the FBI. In a second term, he would go a step further, I'm highly confident, and say, I want him criminally investigated. And he was close to the bottom of the barrel in his appointees last time. He'll be at the very bottom. And those are the people who carry out that order.
And they're there to protect him, not the Constitution or the rule of law. That'll be the first litmus test. Are you loyal to me? And everything flows from there. There is an assumption, Mr. Director, that if he is reelected, he can just make all of these cases go away, the federal cases around January 6th, election interference, around the classified documents as well. Is that your read of it, if he is, when he's sworn in, if he is next January, let's say, for another term, that it all goes away?
Yes. I mean, the person who would incite a mob to sack the Capitol will dismiss the cases that are pending against him.
So who is that? He puts somebody in place who just makes it go away as Attorney General?
Right, he puts an Attorney General in, or more likely he puts an acting in, who then dismisses Jack Smith, and they drop the indictments. Simple as that.
Mr. Director, you've spoken about the judiciary. We know that Donald Trump, when he comes back, has plans to do this thing called Schedule F, where he moves a whole load of civil servants to kind of at-will position and politicizes him. Do you think that could then change the nature of America's civil service writ large, and not just for the Trump presidency? Potentially, if he could do that, why wouldn't a future president do that too?
So yes, I do think that's where he will go, because what he missed last time is that the strength of America, its government, is in the middle layer.
Yeah, we're not just talking about the Attorney General, we're going right through, right?
Right. There's a middle layer that is an apolitical, professional cadre of people. And if you're going to fundamentally alter institutions, you've got to get rid of that middle layer of stability. That's where he will go. And it will have profound consequences, just not for the next 4 years, but for many years after that.
So, Mr. Director, you have found this new chapter, if you forgive the pun, in your career as a novelist, writing these books. Very successful first, Central Park West. For your latest, we've moved up 95, or the Merritt, I guess, however you like to get up there, into Connecticut. Book titled Westport. Tell us about the story.
It's a murder whodunit that is situated in an enormous financial manager, a hedge fund in Westport, Connecticut, a New York suburb, for those who don't know the area. And it's my protagonist, Nora Carlton, is working at the hedge fund, and she finds herself accused of murder. It's, I think, for people, a very fun read that'll take them inside a world. It's fictionalized, but will show them what a part of the world they don't get to see is kind of like.
So how do you sit down and write one of these? I told you we had Harlan Coben on last week, the brilliant Harlan Coben, who is the cover blurb for this book as well. As someone who didn't have experience doing this in your past, how did you get into it, and how are you finding it?
With a lot of help, especially from my wife and my children, who give me loving but brutal feedback. And so that's
their job.
Yeah, it really is a joint effort. But I've always loved to write, and I can picture the people. My protagonist is a composite of 4 of my children, especially my oldest, who's a federal prosecutor. So I can close my eyes and hear her voice and write her much more easily. So it's a little bit of memory lane, a little bit of showing people what worlds are like that I know well, and with help to keep it on track from people who love me enough to tell me when I stink.
Well, it seems to be going well. You're getting good advice, apparently. The new thriller is titled Westport, a crime novel. It is on sale now. Author and former FBI Director James Comey, thanks for being here. Good to see you.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Coming up.
Moments ago, host of the 11th Hour, Stephanie Ruhle, spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and she asked him to respond to those arrest warrants. Take a listen.
My response is no different from President Biden, who said this is outrageous, and many people across the political spectrum in the United States and leaders of democratic countries around the world have called it exactly that. It's a rogue prosecutor who's out to demonize the one and only Jewish state, and he's doing that by first applying a false symmetry. He's equating Israel's democratically elected leaders with the terrorist tyrants of Hamas. That's like saying, well, I'm issuing arrest warrants for, after 9/11, I'm issuing arrest warrants for George Bush, but also for Osama bin Laden. And in World War II, I'm issuing arrest warrants for FDR, but also for Hitler. Thanks a lot. That's a false symmetry, and it's totally absurd. It's a travesty of justice. But the other thing he's doing, he's using also, Stephanie, just this point, he's using also false accusations. He's saying we're drying out Gaza. Drying out Gaza? We're supplying now, before the war, 7% of Gaza's water, now 45% of the water, nearly half, to make sure they have water. He's saying that we have a deliberate policy of starvation. Deliberate policy. We supplied 500,000 tons of food and drugs, 20,000 trucks.
Yes,
We're fixing
sir,
the roadbeds so those trucks can go in.
But we've already heard U.S. aid has said famine is present. We've heard from Cindy McCain, who runs the World Food Program, who has said there's massive famine there. Are you saying that they're lying?
I'm saying that Cindy McCain, unfortunately, is misinformed, and I'm saying that the facts prove otherwise. We flooded Gaza with humanitarian aid, but before that, we supplied it with more than minimal amounts. And we fixed the roadbeds, we fixed the border crossings to make sure that all this food and all these supplies go in. We've enabled airdrops, we've enabled maritime routes, we're building a port there. The whole thing of a deliberate starvation policy is ridiculous, and it's put forward by a guy who doesn't check his facts. He's receiving it, as do others, from the UNRWA and other anti-Israeli agencies and from Palestinian sources. Look, they said just recently that they discovered that, well, they sort of were misinformed, that 10,000 casualties that were supposed to be women and children, now they say, well, we don't know that. I mean,
sir,
so they're fixing it. You know, it takes time for the
discount.
truth to come out.
All right, and Stephanie Ruhle joins us now to tell us more about the interview. It's a tough one, Stephanie, because there are a lot of questions, as you were raising, about Netanyahu's decisions during this entire war since day one. And a lot of answers are, that's for later, that's for later, that's for later. What else did he say?
We actually went back to that day one, Mika, and we talked about sort of the power of Hamas, how October 7th happened, and if Prime Minister Netanyahu underestimated their capabilities. Take a look at this. Back in December, the New York Times reported that you encouraged payments to Hamas from Qatar shortly before the October 7th attack. Did you underestimate what Hamas was capable of doing?
Well, first of all, I did everything in my power to degrade Hamas's military power. I led 3 major military operations against Hamas, which eliminated about 6,000 of their fighters and some of their key leaders, but it didn't root them out. And I think what we're trying to do now is root them out, not have them resurge again, come back out of Rafah with their 4 battalions, retake the Gaza Strip, and then do what they vowed to do, to repeat the horrible October 7th massacre of raping women, beheading women, burning babies, taking hostages. They want to do it over and over again. We can't let them do it. As far as the money that was given to them, it was given to prevent a humanitarian catastrophe, to make sure that the water pumps work, that the sewage pumps work, the electricity works. That was the goal. But we did everything in our power to degrade their military power. Now we want to root them out and get a civilian administration that is not beholden to them and is not beholden to the idea of destroying Israel. That's the way forward.
That was the goal, sir. That was the goal. But October 7th happened, and now you're in a full-blown war. So did you underestimate what Hamas was capable of?
Well, we certainly were surprised on that day. There's no question about that. But we got back on our feet immediately, and we're driving Hamas out. We're doing it in the most difficult urban warfare conditions of modern times, because they have 35,000 terrorists in a dense urban area, 50 meters above ground, 50 meters in a terror tunnel system of 500 kilometers of terror tunnels. It's enormous. And I think they underestimated the fact that we could take them out once we turn things around, and we are. And we're committed to doing it, to finish it. It's not easy. We're getting a bum rap in the international scene. I mean, you have this travesty where the leaders of Israel are being called war criminals when we're fighting war criminals. We're fighting these genocidal Hamas monsters. And then a court that was set up to prevent the repeat of the Holocaust genocide and other such savageries is accusing Israel of such crimes. It's absurd. But, we have to, we have to fight it. The way we fight it is by fighting and winning, and we will.
Mika, he sort of lays it out, fighting and we're going to win, and he's got this game plan, but you can't say that, yes, we're going to just wrap this thing up. This path to peace that he sees is riddled with civilian death and destruction, and at the same time, there are still hostages who have not been returned home. It's a devastating situation.
Steph, nice work pressing him there. He says game plan. The world is watching what he'll do with Rafah. Did he give any sense as to what and when that operation will look like? And also this new domestic pushback he's facing at home, where it seems like his grip on power is as threatened as it's been since October 7th.
Absolutely. He could face another election this year, right? And he keeps saying, after we go into Rafah, they haven't defeated Hamas in other places, right? President Biden just said, you've got certain parts of Gaza where Hamas is popping back up. The IDF is now saying they're fighting Hamas again. So even his argument, well, we just have to get them in Rafah, they're not just in Rafah.
All right, Stephanie Ruhle, thank you very much. Tough interview. We really appreciate it. We'll be watching more of this interview that you had with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tonight on the 11th hour at 11 p.m. Eastern, right here on MSNBC. Thank you, Steph. And Donald Trump's Truth Social account posted a video discussing what would happen if he was reelected, with the newspaper headline referring to a unified Reich, which is a word of course, associated with Hitler's Third Reich during Nazi Germany. Here's the video. The phrase unified Reich shows up very quickly as part of hypothetical news headlines that announces Trump's hypothetical 2024 win. But if you look underneath the "What's Next for America" headline, the smaller headline reads, "Industrial strength significantly increased, driven by a creation of a unified Reich." Trump's campaign spokesperson responded to the backlash, saying that the language was not used intentionally, writing in part, "This was not a campaign video. It was created by a random account online and reposted by a staffer who clearly did not see the word while the president was in court." But the Biden-Harris campaign isn't buying it and blasted that explanation, saying Donald Trump is not playing games. He is telling America exactly what he intends to do if he regains power, rule as a dictator over a unified Reich. I think they took the post down now, Joe.
Yeah, just took it down right now. John Heilman, this is the sort of thing. Of course, they explained it away. They kept it up. We understand from Alex, they just now took it down. But this is the sort of thing. Again, if we go back and sort of search through the ancient mists of history, back to 2015. This is the sort of thing that if any politician, any candidate, any presidential nominee especially, had unified Reich on something that they reposted, the campaign reposted, the sound you would hear would be brakes screeching to a halt. There'd be controversy. People would be talking about it for a week. People would be fired. Here, it's like a yawn, a unified Reich, and they repost it and keep it up for quite a while. I'm surprised they took it down. Yeah, it's just, again, the fact, we were talking about this earlier, the fact that a lot of formerly mainstream voters don't care that there is a candidate out there that talks about being a dictator from day one, talks about executing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff because he's not loyal, talks about putting members of the press in jail because they're critical of him, talks about being able to use SEAL Team 6 to execute political opponents, and said the law can't do anything to him while he's president of the United States, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have people that are just quietly, numbly sleepwalking towards authoritarianism, and they're perfectly fine with it.
10 years, basically, of Donald Trump in our political life, and we have defined deviancy down, Joe. It's just the reality of the situation. A lot of things have been normalized, and one of the ways in which Trump's perpetual lies have benefited him is that people don't take seriously a lot of the things he says. That people just say, well, you know, Trump, he's always talking crap. I mean, who knows? He's never going to do these things. And I think one of the challenges of this election cycle is to make people understand something that Jim Comey was talking about earlier on the air, which is Donald Trump in a second term is more dangerous than Donald Trump in a first term. He now knows how to operationalize. So the idea is he had no idea how to execute last time around.
Yeah. And Alexei, you just wonder what impact his next term, if he gets it, would look like, even when it comes to our jobs and to the people who have stood up to him. He is, and his people are vowing to come after him.
And we should absolutely believe that is the case. He's vowed to sue NBC News and Comcast and media organizations that are critical of him or even write things that he just simply finds unflattering. I mean, it's a disaster. He's sued his way through life. He's lived his life by filing lawsuits, and I think he's built a list of enemies that we all know to be true. We've seen folks even like Bill Barr who come out against him and then say, actually, I guess I'll support him after all.
Right.
And so, you know, the enemies that he's made, they know to go back to him. There are so many people on that list that we don't even know.
Past the hour. Let's go right to the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard is there. Vaughn, give us the very latest on former President Trump's criminal trial.
Hey, good morning, Mika. Donald Trump just walked into the Lower Manhattan courthouse, and the question coming into today, after Robert Costello, that Cohen advisor from 2018, close associate of Rudy Giuliani, who is the main defense witness here at this point, he just entered and took the stand again and is answering further questions from the prosecution. But the big question today is whether Donald Trump would take the stand in his own defense. And I just want to read you the quote that he told the camera there before walking into the courtroom. It was, quote, "We'll be resting pretty quickly." Resting meaning resting the case. That indication from Donald Trump would suggest that he will not take the stand in his own defense. Instead, this would lead the defense to rest its case this morning, and then we could expect come this afternoon, following the lunch break, Judge Merchan would initiate the charging conference. That is where the two parties, without the jury in the room, will begin to deliberate and put forward to Judge Merchan what they believe the specific wording and the specific statutes of the law should be that are presented to the jury next week. When closing arguments are delivered, the jurors are then given jury instructions in which they will be the ones determining whether Donald Trump is guilty or not of the specific wording that these two parties are presenting in tandem to the judge, and ultimately Judge Merchan will be the one to determine exactly what that language looks like. So we're looking at a big day ahead here with Donald Trump likely not testifying himself, but the charging conference here this afternoon that we could expect to get quite contentious between the two sides.